Awesome. All right. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for watching this live stream with me and Adam. As you should know, my name is Jennifer. I'm an MCN manager here for you guys, so I'm always the one looking at all your analytics and your channels and signing you on and all that stuff. So we just got a bunch of new members into the network, so thank you very much for joining on with us. And if this is your first live stream, this is how it's going to go. So if you see, you have the question and answer panel on the side of there, and then what you can do is at any time you can go ahead and type in your questions and I will field them for Adam. It can be about anything you want. If I deem it super inappropriate, I'll just delete them. So you can go ahead and ask your questions. Please keep in mind that the live stream is about 3 to 4 minutes behind, so if we don't get to your burning question right away, just make sure to sit tight. We'll probably get to it just because we are ahead of you. So with that being said, and also you can rewatch this on our YouTube channel after it's all said and done, so you can rewatch everything again if you'd like. So that being said, let me introduce you to Adam, hold on. I'm just going to pull up his bio from his website. He is a self-described filmmaker, writer living in Brooklyn, and he likes puns and sandwiches. So, Adam, would you like to elaborate a little bit more on your bio?
Sure. Hi, everyone. This is quite fun already. So I'm mainly known as a film editor. I work on commercials, TV. I just worked on my first studio feature, but the thing that I'm probably kind of known the most for, or that has the most exposure, is I'm the editor for the Saturday Night Live film unit. So we do the film pieces on the show that air in between the live sketches, so the commercial parodies, the movie trailers, the short films. And I've been working with SNL this is just my 5th season. And we're on hiatus right now, but looking forward to going back for number 6 coming up next year. Yeah.
Awesome. Now, for the SNL, are you like the head editor, or do you have are you the only one? How does that work?
So yeah, so at SNL there's a couple teams. The film unit is the one that's been around since the show began. It used to be run. The director was a legendary director named James Signorelli. And he, basically any commercial parody since the show started up until about 4 years ago. So all, the famous Little Chocolate Donuts and Colon Blow and Happy Fun Ball, all that was this great director, Jim. And since then, it's been headed up by my good friend Rhys Thomas, who is the director and the film producer at the show. So that's the film unit, and I'm the editor with the film unit, and then there's usually not a rotating cast, but a second unit called this year they're called Beast Unit. The directors in that unit are these 2 great guys, Matt and Oz, that are LA-based directors, and there's a really talented editor who usually works with them, Kelly Brickner, or they work on their own stuff. And then there's this year there's another self-contained group similar to when The Lonely Island was on, because those guys would just do their own stuff basically. And that's Good Neighbor, which is Beck Bennett and Kyle Mooney, who are on the cast, and then their director who edits is Dave McCrary. So 3 main teams, but the film unit is the one that's kind of been the most long-standing one, I'd say.
Awesome. Yeah. And you mentioned you're currently working on a studio feature. Are you allowed to talk about that at all, or no?
Sort of not. It's directed by Rhys, the director I work with at the show. I think it's quite funny. It's quite beautiful. Really great cast. A lot of SNL cast members and ex-cast members, and some really kind of fun guests. So yeah, I can't really give much info about it right now, but I think it'll be a fun one.
Do you have any idea when we can look for more information on that? Like when you'll go public with it?
Yeah, I mean, there's been announcements online. I mean, whatever. If you go to IMDb and just Google Staten Island Summer, you can see the link to kind of where the production is right now. But I like it a lot, and the test screenings we've had have gone really well. So hopefully people enjoy it at some point.
Awesome. So how did you get involved in editing? Was it something you always liked to do as a child, or like how did your career process start?
Sure. Just from a broad perspective, a lot of times, people say like, I want to do that. What's the path? And the short answer with that is that there is no path. I wish I could say it's you do this and then you do this and then you work here and you meet this person, but that's definitely not the case. For me, I've always had a combination of broad-based creative artistic interests, but then also tempered with a very kind of tech geeky side. And especially nowadays, being able to combine those two things, with the tools now from editorial is really, necessary. I wish you didn't have to be as computer literate as you were, and it could just be kind of pure creativity. However, that's not the case. One kind of enables the other. But broadly for me, I started kind of making short films and stuff in high school when it was, VHS to two VHS machines, and I remember the first time someone showed me that you could put titles on something. I'm like, oh my God, this is amazing. And then in college, I helped start a sketch comedy show when I was in school with some friends, and we would make our own stuff, and so you learn how to work with people and work on a deadline. Then after college, I started working in on-air promotion, where I'd be a writer, producer, editor, and you'd be responsible for cutting your own stuff. So you learn with that how to take, not necessarily the best footage or the best shows and create something a little more interesting, and you understand like rhythm and pace and how to work with effects and sound. Then after that, I went into kind of big budget commercial post, and that was much more the traditional kind of trial by fire, like real world film education stuff. And that's when you're learning how to deal with multiple houses, like a sound house and a color house, and we were still working with film at the time, and mainly also how to deal with egos and how to deal with clients and directors and appeasing a lot of people at the same time, but keep the whole armchair psychologist side of things, I guess. Sorry?
No, it's okay. I was just gonna chime in like throughout this whole process because I do a few freelance editing, tiny little things on my own, but like I always find it really hard to stay creative when you have this person says it needs to be like this and you need to color correct it like this and
Right.
this needs to go in, and you're like, all right, but that's a whole blurry shot. Like how do you stay creative and stay in it without blowing your brains out because every single client is pulling you in every single direction?
Right. I mean, I think the bigger picture thing is to go into something knowing where everyone stands and how everyone's viewing everyone else. So if you go into something, or if one goes into something thinking like, I'm the creative genius on this, and the person who hired you says you're the button pusher on this, like that's when there's going to be tension. So I like to go into stuff knowing kind of what everyone is expecting from everyone else. That being said, that's not going to happen every time, obviously. So I think for me the trick has been not really a trick, but and this can really apply to like anything you're doing, not just editorial, but or even creatively, tongue twister.
Right.
But just life in general is to kind of be empathetic about where other people are going to be coming from, and then that lets you anticipate basically. So if I know that I've worked with this person before and they're always going to be harping on one specific thing, I like to get ahead of that, not necessarily nip that in the bud, but try to address it beforehand, especially if I know it's not going to work. So it'd be like, okay, I know you want to see this. Here's this. So they're appeased. And then, oh, hey, let's look at this. So it's sort of a soft sell Jedi mind trick type of crap where, in a perfect situation, you're letting someone make the decision that they think they're making, even though you kind of like subtly led them in that direction. And
So like Inception and Jedi mind tricks together.
Right. But it all stems from empathy and just anticipating where people are most likely going to be coming from. That saves a lot of pain. And then some people are just, that's never going to happen. Then you just kind of bite your tongue and power through and have a strong drink afterwards.
Yeah, there are always that clients that say like, you have 100% creative control. Don't worry about it. I'm super, whatever you want to do. And then like down the line, they're like, no, you can't do that. This needs that. Like, and then all of a sudden they control everything.
Right. The best people that I found to work with really in any pursuit are the ones who are confident in the people that they're bringing in on something. So, they obviously have the final say, and that's been what's great about working with Reese and working with people at SNL is, at the end of the day, Reese is still the director on stuff, or the producers of the show are still the producers of the show. So they're like it's their call, and rightfully so. But the really good executives are the ones who have the confidence. They're bringing in people who they know are good, and then to an extent, not getting out of their way, but letting them do what they do, and that's only going to make everyone else look better, ideally.
As far as like editing tips go, and like, is there any few tricks or things that you learned along your career that you wish, like, oh, if I only figured out like this earlier, my life would have been so much better, or my films would have been so much better?
I don't know. I wouldn't say that it's, oh, if I knew how to do that faster, that would have saved a lot of time. I think it's such an aggregate of, small little things that you pick up along the way that when you look back on them, you're like, oh my God, that's a lot of stuff. But in the moment, there's very rarely been, at least for me, like a big eureka, well, this changes everything type of thing. I think a lot of it is just the time and the repetition and doing stuff. A lot of times I'll be working on something, and if someone asks me in the moment, like, why did you do that? I did it initially just because, like, oh, well, that just felt right now. If we really want to sit down and analyze it, I guess I did it because the motion of the guy standing up to the left really drew your eye that way, so we cut to on his head turn, and motion, masks this, and then we put like a subtle low hit under it, and blah, 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 blah. I mean, if you want to break it down, you can, but I think the trick is you do stuff enough that it should be coming from like a more instinctual place. That just kind of like, does it feel right? If so, then it's probably right, as opposed to like hard, fast rules.
What about like research? Because I know a lot of like especially directors of photography tend to copy each other with shots and everything. Do editors do the same thing? Like, oh, that was edited really well. Let's
Definitely.
like copy that. Do you do a lot of research on your own too?
Yeah, well, I think SNL and the film unit pieces, there's two main things about post production at SNL that are very unique. The first is the timeline. We can talk about that later, but like we work on an insane turnaround. I mean, we shoot everything on Friday for air the next night. Oftentimes, Friday night bleeding into Saturday morning. So that's a whole thing. It's about speed and efficiency. But the other unique thing is the variety of the stuff we work on. So if you're working on a show, like say you're the editor on, I don't know, what's the show on TV? CSI, right?
Rick and Morty, animated show, different.
Yes, that's a great show. Go Channel 101. If you're working on CSI and taking nothing away from the people working on CSI, because you still have to be an incredible editor and understand pacing and timing, but you're doing the show, even though it's a different show each week, the style is similar, the tone's going to be pretty similar. Like once you understand how it works, like that's the way it works, and that's awesome. Like the weird thing about SNL and the film pieces is 1 week to the next has nothing to do with each other. So we're doing sometimes just a very traditional cinematic short film, and then the next week we're doing an action over the top movie trailer, and then we're doing something that feels like a Bravo reality show promo, and then something that feels like a documentary. So the thing I've learned, that I have to be mindful of, and that Reese is really great about, and we'll talk about this before as far as reference points. It's not that you're necessarily like stealing so much as you're like really watching with an aesthetic eye, because a lot of times they'll say like I really like that, and you say, well, why did you like that? Like, oh, because it was cool. So that's a little too broad. So what we try to do is kind of be mindful about like the bones that make something up. Like, why did that feel cool there? Like, oh, it felt cool because the way that it paced up to the pause and the exhale that like really let it breathe, like gave you that tension before it kicked back in really hard. So it's figuring out the bones of what something is, and then not necessarily stealing, but like appropriating from that to then be able to to be able to make your own stuff, and then building on from that to develop your own style.
Awesome.
That was long-winded.
No, that was good though, because especially as animators, like it's good to watch other cartoons. Like if you love Adventure Time, why do you love Adventure Time? Is it the story? Is it the pacing? Is it the characters? Like really figuring out why you like and don't like things is really important for everyone in any profession, really. Yes. And that leads me to our first question, which Jake asked about timing in general, like timing and spacing. He particularly asks, like, when telling a joke, how do you decide whether to, like, really build it up or do it quick? I know that TV for SNL is completely different than YouTube, and if maybe you can give some insights on the differences between that sort of timing between TV and YouTube as well.
Sure. For me, one of at the show, I'm lucky that the footage I get from a comedic perspective is being written by incredibly talented writers and being acted by incredibly talented comedic actors. So to that end, when it's something where the raw performance is great, what I usually want to do is almost get out of the way of that and let it be what it is. And I think that's an important thing too, is knowing when not to do something. A lot of times, like, oh, we can be flashy and we can be cutty and do this, but if something breathes and plays right the way it is, let that be. That being said, for me, a lot of times the stuff that'll get a good reaction or plussing something versus how it appeared on the script is usually using kind of audio cues and surprise to build something. So a lot of times, if you're tightening up someone's reaction to something versus how they were playing it out in real time, the fact that like they're coming off something comedically quick, like that sort of uncomfortable surprise is in itself funny. Or if it's something that needs to be awkward, play the awkwardness like a little bit longer than it should. So it's very contextual. It depends so much on whatever it is you're working on and whatever the performance of the time is. Then for me, like ideally if it makes you laugh while you're doing it, that should be your driving instinct. It's in the same way that people say, like, write something that you like or make something that you like, as opposed to trying to figure out what other people will like. And then if you like it, there'll be someone else who sees, the nugget of what you're doing, and then they'll like it also. So that's usually how I decide if something's working or not, whether it makes me like, oh yeah, that was funny. Yeah.
And is there a difference between how you would edit something for TV versus how you would edit something for like an internet short, specifically on YouTube, because all of our animators deal with YouTube?
No, not really. I think good is good. I think content, especially now, is content. Obviously if you're watching something on a computer versus a TV, size-wise it's a little different, and context-wise it's a little different, but you see now, especially, you see so many people who are really good YouTube filmmakers not even cross over anymore, because now I think it's all content, it's all media, it just happens to be on a different screen. If you have solid timing and pacing and a sense of humor on YouTube, I don't see why you'd have to change anything up for what you're doing on TV, personally.
What about, because a lot of people are concerned that because YouTube is such an engaged platform, like instead of like TV or film where you call like a lean back experience where the remote's far away, you don't really want to change the channel, but on YouTube it's just one simple click and you're somewhere off. Like, right. Do you think it's really important to make sure that you get someone's interest and attention from the very beginning in order so they don't click away? And like, how would you do that, you think?
Definitely. Again, it's all, and this is kind of just a broad overall thing, it's all context specific depending on the type of piece, but as far as attention span goes, at least for me, the thing that'll usually make me turn something off the quickest, and the quickest indication of something being, for lack of a better word, amateur, not necessarily like professional, but just kind of like starts with the audio, truthfully. I think even from an animation perspective, if it's simple animation but with like a really rich sound bed, you're gonna be much more able to jump into the reality of the moment and to let it play off you, or to just be into it more. Versus you could have, you know, 70 millimeter IMAX projection, the most beautiful footage ever, and then the first person comes on screen and they start talking and it sounds tinny, done. Like, can't watch it, cannot watch it. So I think a lot of times people, they focus, not that they, especially with animators, not that they shouldn't be focusing immensely on the visuals, but at the same time I think like a really fleshed out full sound bed that draws you in, like that'll, especially if it hits you right off the top, that'll, you know, be the hook that kind of gets you to stay and gets you like the believability aspect of it.
No, that's a great point, because even on YouTube, there's a lot of very successful animators. There's a few that I can think of that don't really animate. It's just picture on top of picture on top of picture, and it's like quickly cutting. And it's not really animation, but people watch it and people love it. It's because, one, the story's there, the sound is really good, and it's quickly paced between those pictures. So they do, like, Swoozie is a great example. I don't know if you know who Swoozie is on YouTube, but he's an awesome example of like kind of animation, but a fantastic storyteller, and it just sucks you in right from the beginning. So like speaking of bad material and like bad audio, and I mean, SNL is amazing, but like way back in the beginning when you were maybe first starting, would you get material that was, lack for a better word, like not very good or lackluster, and like what would you do to really spruce it up? Did you have any tricks or whatever? Like, oh, if we just fix the coloring, it'll be so much better.
Right. I mean, there's always ways. Here's the thing I think now as an editor, you know, obviously the better your source material, the better you'll be able to make something. But that being said, you know, you're definitely going to be presented with situations where it's, you know, far less than ideal. And I think the thing with that is, like, if you can just be taking whatever you have, even if it's bad, and just making it better, then you're bringing, you know, value to the project, and people are going to work with you again. You know, from a bad sound or a bad footage perspective, I think a lot of times you have to either try to make it, not necessarily make it something that it isn't. If you have bad audio and you know, you really can't understand what the person is saying, there's really not that much you can do. So you have to come up with, you know, a creative solution. Like, you have to tell the director, hey man, this audio is just not usable. We have to really rethink everything. So, okay, we're going to take this shaky footage, we're going to pull stills from it, we're going to record VO with it, and we're going to have it as, like, you know, now it becomes more of a period piece, black and white, slow pushing on stuff with, you know, music underneath it and the voiceover telling the story. Is that what they shot it initially? No, but you have to usually come up with a creative solution. I think that's the you know, overall thing is coming up with a creative solution is going to be your best way to get around, you know, less than ideal footage. Still, you want to be working with better stuff off the top, and that's something when people say, you know, just advice to directors and DPs, and I would say, you know, talk if you can, and you know who's going to be editing it. I think a lot of times people, they look for the editor after everything's done. I think it makes a lot more sense to, you know, be having conversations with whoever's going to be working on this stuff beforehand, to hear, you know, what he or she has to say and what they would recommend on something, because they're the ones who's going to have to oftentimes be dealing with, you know, the initial annoyances. So the sooner you can start the collaborative process, the better across the board.
Do you have particular annoyances that you can't stand that DPs do?
I mean, I'm lucky at the show that the DP that we work with is also one of my good buddies, and he's incredible. Alex Bono, just a really, I mean, Academy Award nominated, you know, just an incredible cinematographer. So I wouldn't say that I've like specific. A couple things that, like, in the past, you know, either they don't roll enough before or roll enough after, so you're, you know, very locked into what you're using. You have very limited options. You're not getting enough insert coverage. whereas you have your master takes and your master setups, your master, and not enough B-roll and like thoughtful B-roll to be able to cut away and paste stuff and be able to kind of cut stuff up in an interesting way. I think a lot of times too, and Alex has talked about this, when cinematographers start out, they're very, very precious about making sure that every shot is perfect, which is great, but at the same time, you have to be, when you're a cinematographer, oftentimes be thinking about how this is going to eventually cut together. So if you have, you're trying to do like a 50-second kind of walking in shot, and this goes this way, and he comes around the corner, and the timing isn't perfect. If you know it's not going to be a one shot to begin with, and we're going to have coverage on the other side, and we'll be able to cut in and cut it and cut around that, it's okay sometimes if it doesn't go 100% correct. So figure out that balance between perfection and feasibility within a timeline, I'd say.
I'm a bit curious about what your editing process is like. Like, so you receive all the footage. Do you do like a storyboard or a draft, or maybe because you've already talked about them, you already have that storyboard already set up? But like, do you do a first cut, second cut, notes? Like, how does your particular process work?
Sure. SNL again is very unique just based on the timeline. So we don't know what we're shooting until Wednesday night, and then Thursday is all pre-production. I'll have the script Wednesday night, and I'll start from my end while everyone is actually building sets and casting and location scouting and talent coordination. It's what the people on the show do from a production standpoint is amazing. I'll start to look at the script and kind of map out potential beats, on the script. Like, okay, here's where the turn would be. Here's some sound effects that I think I should pull here. Here's the type of music that might work. That being said, when I then start to get the footage on Friday, or if it's late, I'll be on set working remotely there while they're breaking camera. If your initial thoughts don't line up with what you're seeing, you got to scrap them. Like that's totally fine, and that's expected. It's less storyboarded at the show just because we don't really have time. They'll shot list, and they'll shot list really well, but we've been working together for long enough now and on so many projects that they know how to get coverage. They know it's needed. They're dyed-in-the-wool pros. And then cuts-wise, I try to have like a very rough assembly of all the beats basically before I go to bed Saturday morning. So our color house can get a start on doing the final color correct. And then we'd like to have a cut to show, a decently filled in cut to show to writers and producers around, say, 1 or 2 o'clock on Saturday. And then it's a process of tightening and tweaking and, rearranging the script. And just figuring out what's working the best in the time frame. The weird thing about it is because our time frame is so compressed, it's a lot of kind of almost like improv filmmaking in the sense. Like, is this working? Yes, good, go, on we go. There's less time to be really precious about it versus when you're working on a commercial and you're with the agency and you have 2 weeks to work on a 30-second, a 60-second spot. There's a lot more. Well, let's try every possible take in here and see the very, very subtle differences between this. And does it sometimes make it better? Sure. Does it make it better that people will really notice? Who's to say? So I like that. One of the things about the tight timeline is it forces you to kind of go based on instinct and what's working.
Right, and make executive decisions fast rather than mulling over them for a week.
Yeah, there's definitely a point of diminishing returns when it comes to changes, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And then there's a point where you're just like, I don't want to work on this anymore. Or creatively, you're just like, I'm done. Right.
Burnout is a definite real thing.
Totally. I mean, yeah. I have a question. Well, actually, Jake asked this question. What project are you most proud of that you've worked on? Like, it could be an SNL piece or a feature. Like, Is there any particular story behind why it's your favorite?
I mean, I think the feature that we're working on right now is probably just the thing that I'm most proud to be a part
Yeah,
of.
but you
Just
can't really talk about that
I
one.
know, just by the nature of it and the scope of it, and it's just a very different way of working and thinking than on SNL. But as far as I'd say, my favorite SNL project was either the Wes Anderson horror movie trailer that we did this past
Oh
season.
yeah, that was awesome.
Oh, thank you.
I'm a huge
Uh,
fan of horror, and I really like Wes Anderson. So
there
I
you
was like,
go.
oh, my favorite things combined.
The Wheelhouse.
Yeah.
Either that or the we did I guess two trailers, three things. Either that one, the other trailer we did this season for the Bajancy, it was called. It was like a Tony Scott action thriller trailer about like a clandestine agency that arrests people if they don't like Beyonce, basically. Uh,
That's not a
and
thing? I thought that was real.
oh no, it's real. It was a
Oh,
documentary. Yeah,
okay.
all found footage. Um, and the third was a last season we did a thing with Louis C.K. as Abraham Lincoln. Because Louis is one of my favorite shows on television, and it was getting that tone correct, and I think we really did a great job with that within the timeline of what we had to do. And that was also that shoot. The production team, again, they're amazing. That was during Hurricane Sandy in New York, so that was in downtown New York at night with no power, no nothing.
Oh
So it was
man.
just a real intense undertaking. And on Wes Anderson, we were feeding that to air 20 seconds ahead of the live broadcast. So it's
Oh my God.
very very intense timelines. But then when you're done, it makes it that much more rewarding. And then if people like it, even better. So yeah.
Have you guys ever missed a timeline?
Nope, not yet. Knock on wood.
Knock on wood.
Yeah.
Never gonna happen. Well,
Yeah.
good, because I could imagine that could be pretty easy to do when it's so fast all the time.
Yeah, where we try to deliver our final picture about ideally like 10 or 15 minutes before it's on TV, which a lot of people are like, that's crazy. But to us, it's that's good because we can watch it back like once or twice beforehand. So yeah, tight turnarounds, fun stuff.
Oh, I bet. It's not stressful at all. It's all fun. All fun and games.
Yeah.
So there's this article in the Tribeca Film Festival where you gave 6 pieces of advice for editors and other creative people.
Hmm.
So those 6 pieces of advice for people there. Actually, it's weird because you say 6, but then they list 9.
Well, the other three,
So
the other three are actually my favorite parts of the whole article. Those are in the intro. I basically say like, okay, I'm going to give some advice, but within that advice are selections of my upcoming techno thriller erotic science fiction novel. It's just jokes. So the other 3 are selections from Science Friction, I believe is what it was called.
science fiction, that's amazing.
Yeah,
So
kind of.
the polymath one, mess around, never forget.
Yeah, it was, what was it? It was, I forget. It was the last one, I think the third one, and I think like the 6th or something like that. But I forget. Polymath was real. Mess around was real. Check the boot disc, I
Check the
think was
boot
fake.
disc.
And oh god, I don't remember. I don't remember the third
Well,
one.
let me list them all. So there's
Sure.
work clean.
That's real.
All right, get something down.
That's real.
Check the boot disc, which you
That
said
is not real.
not real. Know what you like.
That's real.
Enjoy what you're doing.
That's real.
Drop everything.
That's not real.
Polymath, mess around, and never forget.
First 2 real, last one not.
Okay. So let's talk about the real ones.
Sure.
So let's start with work clean. Like, what does that mean as a creative person working on anything?
Sure. I mean, I think, a lot of times people will say, I'm an artist and I work in chaos and that's just part of the process is, throw it out there and, have whatever lands will be. And, I don't need to be organized. Organization is for people who work in an office. I disagree 100,000%, especially in editorial. If you don't have a buttoned up, clean, either just workspace in general or within your software or within a Finder level as far as how you're organizing stuff, that is going to get in the way of the actual creative process eventually. Um, Ideally, someone should be able to come in and look at what you're doing, and it should make sense immediately. Not necessarily what you're doing from the actual work, but they say, here's his bin structure, here's the way he's laying stuff out. I can see the way that this person's mind is working. Because once you're doing that, it allows you to actually focus on the making of something as opposed to where something is. And for me, it's being uniform in that from the get-go and across the board. You know, a lot of times people will start something and they'll start it, a little haphazardly as far as where they're putting stuff. And you're like, oh no, I'll clean it up eventually. And then you get a little further, like, oh, I'll clean it up eventually. And then you get to the point and you open it and you're a week in and it's insane. To me, it's the exact same story as if you've ever seen like an episode of Hoarders and they talk to the lady who has, 50 frozen cats in the fridge. And
I missed that episode.
They're like, well, how did this happen? She's like, I don't know. I had one cat, and then I got another, and then I got another, and then eventually I had 600 cats, and it was too late. It was too much to fix. So don't be that person with 50 frozen cats in the freezer. Don't do that.
Like my laundry situation. Like, yeah, I'll get to it definitely next week, and then I'm like, why do I have no clothes anymore?
Right. Right.
Good life advice as well as creative advice.
I guess so. Yeah.
And it's so much less stressful.
That's the main thing. Anything that you can do that gets out of the way of the actual making of the thing and working on the process. People say, but it takes a little bit more time in the beginning. That will exponentially save you so much time on the back end, and you'll be so just mind free as far as like not having to worry about that if you just work within a system. So to me, it just makes much more sense.
Awesome.
But to each their own, I guess.
Well, work clean. I think it's sound advice. And number 2, get something down. What do you mean by that?
So a lot of times people they'll ask, and also broad question or broad overall in all of this. Mm-hmm. This is just the way that I've found works for me. If anyone has a way that works better for them, that lets them do their best work, continue to do it that way, and that is the only way you should ever do it. This is all just stuff that I have found useful in my own work, and especially within the weird confines of the show. So getting something down for me is all about, people say like, well, where do you start? How do you start? I need the first thing or if you're writing, the first sentence is always very hard. Or the first paragraph is always very hard. Same thing in editorial. Where do you start in the script? Do you start at the beginning? Where do you start with the B-roll? Do you find the one thing? And then, okay, I don't know, where does that go? For me, I just like to I'll pick a thing and then we'll start there. Because then, almost regardless of what it is, because then you have something that you're reacting to. It's kind of the Band-Aid effect as opposed to being like very precious and very perfect on your first thing. Because whatever you're putting down first is probably not going to be right to begin with. So it's the difference between creating within a vacuum and reacting to something. So if you're constantly in your head about, oh, where do we start? And then you're not sure, and then you start again, and then you start again, that's hard. Just get it on there and start going, and then you can be actually having something to critique as opposed to just being in your own head about what you're doing. Because it's much easier to, give notes on something tangible than figure out, where you're going to go in an empty timeline or an empty sheet of paper.
Right. Like, this is going into my head. It's kind of like a puzzle. Like, you have to start with one piece somewhere. That piece might not work anywhere, and it might be hard to fit other pieces, but you have to start somewhere and then slowly build off of that one thing and then fit it all together in the long run. You have
exactly. And also, too, when for me, sort of the build on top of that, when I'm starting a lot of times, like, let's say I know that we're using a song. Let's say people, like, a lot of times I'll talk to people and say, well, I'm not working on really nice scripted stuff. I'm doing wedding videos or I'm doing corporate videos. Like, same lessons apply in the sense that, like, find a little nugget of something that you know is is working. Um, Even if it's towards the end or totally in the middle or at the beginning, and then have that point be something that you kind of like can build off around. So if you have a point like, say you're doing a wedding video and you know that there's this great part in the song where it comes up and you have this footage of the bride turning her head and like the way that those two land together you really like, start right there and then kind of be walking back and forward like from that to build up. So you have like point of like really happy things and just let those kind of expand and fill in. I've always found that easier, and because then you have something that you know works. Like I know that this part right here works, and then someone will see them and be like, yeah, that part worked. So almost regardless of like if stuff around it isn't perfect, you have something tangible that you know is good.
And I feel that way also helps with pacing too.
Yes.
So leading right into that, something we've already briefly talked about is knowing what you like and why you like it. Number 4. We talked about it earlier about like researching and figuring out why you like things. Is there anything you want to elaborate on that at all? Because we did talk about it.
But briefly, I mean, one of the things that I think I said in the article is talking about a lot of times one of the reasons that I'll like a thing or a song or a book is almost less the whole presentation of it or the whole song, even though I do, and it's one like brief instant of something in it, like the way a harmony hits, or just a very quick look in a film. And so I think it's like being mindful of those really kind of special moments, and having kind of a back catalog of like I liked it here because as opposed to being right on point, it was like a little bit behind, and that kind of cool imperfection was interesting for some reason. And then so maybe you're working on something later and you're like, oh yeah, that thing that I like as far as being off in a purposeful way, let's try to bring that into this maybe. So it's just the more back catalog and the more self-knowledge about why you dig stuff, the better you can apply that to what you're doing.
Right. So research and looking at other people's methods is amazing things. Is really awesome to pull from for everybody.
Yeah.
Including cartoonists and animators. So number 5 is actively enjoy what you're doing.
Yeah.
I'm sure this can lead so much into burnout and just, especially with animation, because it takes months and months to hand draw everything starting from finish, and it's just like if you don't enjoy what you're doing, you're just going to burn out, right? How do you avoid that burnout?
I mean, I think a lot of it is being cognizant why you started doing something to begin with. Always being mindful of that. A lot of times, you'll hear writers say, writing is the worst thing in the world. I hate it. It's so hard to do. And it is hard to do, but you ideally, even if it's painful, you're doing it because you love doing it, or you get, the fulfillment of being done with something is what is pushing you forward. For me with editorial, even when it's like really intense nights and there's a lot of pressure and it's something's not working, at the end of the day you're working with really cool toys and working on stories and having fun. So I try to be mindful of that no matter what I'm working on. Even if it's something that might be not the most glamorous thing, there's always an aspect of it, even if it's just the enjoyment of I'm working a timeline, I just picked up, an hour of footage and dragged it that way. So you have to kind of sometimes trick yourself into, not games, but, convincing yourself of the fun of something you're doing isn't necessarily a bad thing. Or just go for a walk every once in a while, too.
Right.
That always helps.
Walks in the city are nice, too.
Yeah.
Do you have a dog?
I do not, though I'm getting a lot of pressure to get one.
Well, just saying, they're nice. Okay, so definitely enjoy what you're doing, especially if you're going to be doing it over and over and over and over and over again.
Yeah, if you're not having fun on some level, then why are you doing it?
Exactly. No point torturing yourself.
Very true.
So number 7 is be a polymath.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
It's a big word that I'm not sure if I even wrote that down on purpose at the time. It basically, have outside interests, especially creatively, as opposed to just the thing that you're working on. So if you're an animator, you know, I think if you're really into some stuff outside of animation, that's going to only plus your animation skills or just the way that you're thinking about stuff. So for me, I like to be really music centric in what I like, as opposed to just like I'm going to learn everything there is to know about editing and computers and filmmaking. Like, no, I want to get stuff that creatively might be related but isn't exactly what I do, because the more outside influences and the more kind of broad life experiences that you're having creatively, it's only going to help to plus whatever it is you're doing, because you're going to find self connections between not necessarily related things that will then just whatever you're working on will just allow you to bring more into it and make it more interesting based on your own life experiences. So what I figured, I said, like, if you're a writer, start a stupid band with some friends. If you're in a band, start writing a book. I don't like just anything to kind of like give your brain a refresh, but still keep it engaged.
Right, and that leads us to our last point, which is messing around.
Yeah. I think especially with one of my best friends. I'm not sure if you know. He's less an animator, more an illustrator. Dave Franzese. He does a creative shop called Dark Igloo. Highly recommend you check him out. I go over there and I just watch him. We'll be sitting there hanging out, and he'll just be sketching, and I'll just be watching him sketch. And this is just straight brain play of, enjoying whatever's coming out of his head and playing around, and then this idea leads to this, which then becomes this project, which then becomes this like real thing with this company then buys off on this idea, and then you have like this like, oh my god, where did this start? And it started because you're utilizing like your mind and the tools that are available now, especially with filmmaking, to mess around. Like, open the program, take a piece of footage, press every button, figure out what everything else does, that even stuff that you're never going to use in a million years, but it's all about just having fun with what you're doing. And that's a lot of times where you'll come across something that if you're sitting down like, I have to think of something cool right now, like that's never going to happen. It's when you're not focused on any sort of specific discovery goal and you're just messing around, like that's when stuff will come out. And the tools now, because you're not working on film, you don't have to be really mindful of, well, we're only in this room for 2 hours and it's $2,000 an hour, so we got to get this out. Like, you can sit at home on your laptop with, a relatively affordable piece of software and just come up with whatever's in your head and play around with stuff. And that's how I learn more than any tutorial or, any book, is just by having fun and kind of goofing off, basically.
Do you still do you schedule that time for yourself? Like, because you have so many deadlines, and I'm sure you're silly busy. Like, do you still find time to mess around and do that? And how do you find that time between all of your projects?
It's harder, but I still think it's necessary. I'll just do stuff because like I enjoy making silly, cool-looking stuff regardless. So if someone sends an email on something as opposed to just responding with text, like, oh, this would be a fun, stupid thing. Let's take this still and let's cut out the background. Let's put in like a fake 3D camera and like dumb stuff that makes you laugh that isn't necessarily being put towards anything. But the things that you're learning by doing it and just like what you're bringing for your own peace of mind to it, I think helps with your real work. But no, I don't block off like this is thinky happy time.
This is creative time.
Right.
Because that kind of defeats the purpose, right?
Exactly.
Now you mentioned like affordable programs. What would you suggest programs that we could use? Because I don't know, what programs do you use? Like, do you use Avid, Final Cut Pro, anything like that?
Yeah. So at the show, I started out when I was in commercials more on Avid centric, because at the time that was when we were still, most of the spots are still shooting on film, and you're in like a kind of a big budget workflow environment with multiple users. Avid was great, and truthfully, like most feature films are still being cut on Avid. although we cut this one on Premiere. When I started at SNL, we were on Final Cut 7, which was great. At the moment, we're entirely Adobe Creative Cloud based, so I'm cutting in Premiere and doing a lot of work as far as motion graphics and compositing and titling in After Effects. I'll never say from a broad perspective like this is the best software. Like there's the best software for whatever your specific needs and whatever you get the most comfort and pleasure out of what you're doing. Like for us in our timeline, because we have to turn stuff around so fast, and I'm doing a lot of effects work right there. Premiere and After Effects are directly linked, so we don't have to be kicking out files and then bringing them back in and kicking them out again, and we don't really have to render anymore. We're working with tons of different cameras and it can deal with all the different varieties of camera that we use. So for us, that makes by far the most sense. That being said, if you like Final Cut X, or if you like Avid, or if you like iMovie, awesome. That's so great. That's like in the same way, no one will know what it was cut on when they watch the final thing. No one knows what what word processor an essay was written on. It makes no difference. So just be mindful of the things that you need to do, and maybe let that dictate it. But at the end of the day, it's whatever you personally enjoy.
Right. And there's I used to work on Final Cut 7, and then they changed it to Final Cut 10, and I switched over to Premiere personally after that.
Yeah. And don't get me wrong, Final Cut 10, the underlying technology behind a lot of it is really great. For our workflow, it didn't work, but I know people who do incredible work on it all the time. Just for me right now, Premiere and like the Creative Cloud is just by far the most useful.
It's seamless. It really is between everything, and even because I also do a lot of graphic design work on Photoshop and stuff. Like everything is just so integrated, and it'll render as you're working on it in Premiere.
It's great. Yeah, we render basically once.
Yeah.
At the very end.
It's awesome. So we're winding down a little bit. So if anyone has let's answer this one question from Rob that pulled in. He asks, are there any plugins or filters that you just can't live without?
I wouldn't say necessarily can't live without. I'm a big fan of Red Giant and their whole suite. They have this thing now called Universe, which is similar to Creative Cloud, a web-based updater where you can constantly be on whatever the newest version is. They also do a lot of great stuff as far as compositing tools, because we're doing a fair amount of green screen work, and to be able to get like a nice, realistic edge on your keys, and use light wrap a lot, which is part of their keying suite, which lets you take whatever background plate you're using and kind of wrap whatever the natural light would be from that around your source. So if you have like a fireball behind someone and you have them keyed out, as opposed to, just here's a person and then here's fire and then nothing's kind of coming over their face, that looks fake. It lets you kind of like really kind of, bleed the edge of something in a realistic way. I think that's great. Their color correction tools are really wonderful also. But I think with plugins as a whole, use them as they're needed and not overkill. It should be like, kung fu in the sense that like know them, so you only have to use them when they're necessary.
Have you studied kung fu or karate?
Not for many years. When I was a little kid, I was really into it, but yeah, I think my 10-year-old self could actually beat me up right now.
Aw, it's all right.
Yeah.
Speaking of your 10-year-old self until now, like, are there any cartoons that you really enjoyed or things that you watch and maybe like pull references from in your own work?
I mean, I'm a huge John Kay fan. I love his blog. Not sure is that good within the Frederator world?
No, whatever. We love all animations and cartoons in general.
I grew up a pretty intense Ren and Stimpy kid, and just I like the surrealistic nature, the kind of the gross detailedness of it all. But I mean, as a youth, the very choppy, poorly animated styles of like He-Man and Smurfs, and I watched a lot of cartoons. It's funny now, like when you look back in retrospect from like a more adult, like analytic eye, as far as like what you like, and you're like, I liked it, but it wasn't necessarily well made, but I still enjoyed it. And then my younger brother was really heavy into like Real Monsters and Doug, and just kind of the Nicktoons section of things. So that was definitely, I wouldn't say influential specifically for what I do, but from a big picture, just general enjoyment of form and weirdness was really good.
Is there anything you watch now?
Cartoon wise, I watch Adventure Time.
Nice, like to hear
I think
it.
Rick and Morty is great. I've actually liked. It's funny, like because Justin Roiland, the guy who does that with Dan Harmon, when I was in LA before I moved to New York, I would go to all the Channel 101 screenings, where that came out of. So it's really cool to see something that started as an independent making it at home with a couple friends because you have some chops, and then the fact that like that sensibility is carried over into like a true network show. Oh, and Aqua Teen is like my favorite thing of all time.
Aqua Teen Hunger Force.
Yeah.
That's definitely weird.
Yeah.
And
Well,
poorly animated. It's a mix of He-Man and Ren and Stimpy.
Exactly. And from a bigger picture perspective, I can't believe I didn't even say this, but I almost don't even think of it as an animated show because it's just such a part of my brain. I mean, The Simpsons to me is the best show that's ever been made. It's informed so much of my like comedic sensibility. And there's such a large chunk of my brain that is devoted entirely to Simpsons trivia. Probably to my detriment, truthfully. But
when did The Simpsons first air?
1989 on the Tracy Ullman Show.
What month? Do you know what month or what season?
Well, the first real season they say was like 1990, but they had the Christmas episode in '89. But so I'm trying to think if then the shorts on Tracy Ullman would probably be like '87, maybe. I don't know.
What is one of your favorite Simpsons episodes? I'm not going to say the favorite because that would be probably really hard.
That is very, very hard. I'm a big fan of the Beer Baron episode. It's Homer versus I gotta forget the amendment, the 22nd Amendment. That's pretty classic. A lot of the John Swartzwelder written ones. I'm a huge John Swartzwelder fan. I have all his. I highly recommend anyone who likes that kind of Americana, hard-boiled, grizzled cop throwback type of thing that he does. He puts out like a short book a year.
Really?
They're kind of hard to find, but they're so amazing. Can't recommend them highly enough. And all the Treehouse of Horrors are great. The film, this could go on for a very long.
That's okay. Do you play that Simpsons Tapped Out game that I see everyone playing all the time?
I've played it a couple times. There's also I live in Brooklyn, and there's a couple bars that they'll do Simpsons trivia nights.
You just sweep the floor with everyone?
No, well, that's the funny thing. Like, I guess that's like that with a lot of just stuff in general in the world. It's like you think that you're really good at something, and maybe you are, and then you meet someone who's like, oh no, they're really good at it. There's definitely a level of dedication and insanity that I haven't approached yet. So I don't know if it's humbling or like actually comforting to know that.
To know that you don't know the most about The Simpsons?
Yeah.
Well, everyone always needs goals, and I always find that there's always someone better than you all the time. Yes. And honestly, it'd be really stressful if you were the best at it, I think, anyway, because be like, oh, I agree. Keep up with everything.
Self-doubt is a solid motivator. It doesn't necessarily have to be a negative thing, in my opinion. It keeps you hungry and on your toes and constantly sharp.
Awesome. So thank you so very, very much for coming on board with us and talking about editing and just the industry in general and short timelines, which a lot of animators have to deal with. Just letting everyone know, again, this live stream will be available after it goes live on our YouTube channel. It should it should go up by tomorrow because YouTube has to process it, and it's an hour long, so it might take a little while. Adam, why don't you tell us a little bit about your tour coming up, because we actually never even mentioned it.
Oh my goodness, I'm a terrible marketer.
It's okay. So yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so this summer, you know, a lot of the things that we talked about today, but you know, more post-production centric. I'm going to be going on a 32-city tour, where we're going to be kind of talking about our workflow at SNL, and you know, what does it really mean to be an editor today? You know, people expect so many different things from you oftentimes now. So you say you're an editor, and that means that you're a compositor and a sound designer and a motion graphics artist and a music editor and a colorist and an armchair psychiatrist, and you know, all this stuff. So we're going to talk about, you know, what does that mean? How can we use some of the lessons of the stuff that I've worked on at SNL to show what's possible in kind of a broad perspective? And you know, how can you get more efficient at your own work? How can you be thinking about it more critically? You know, how can you be looking at it, stuff that classic films and great commercials have done, and you know, apply that to your own work? How can you use some keyboard shortcuts that make you faster? I mean, we're going to be talking about, it's a full day workshop. We're going to be talking about a litany of issues. So yeah, come on out. It should be good. Starts July 20th. Oh my God, I still have so much more to do.
5 days.
You don't remind me. And, but if you want some more info, go to edgetour.com and check it out, or follow me. Or you can go to @CuttingEdgeTour on Twitter, and on Twitter I'm at @EppyAd. That's EPPYAD. So yeah, check it out. Hope to see you guys out there.
And I'll pull all this information from you at the end of this, and I'll upload it to the community so you don't have to remember everything.
That's great.
So I'll make a post for it there. So thanks again, and I want to leave with one final question, probably the toughest question of the night. If you could give a single piece of advice to everyone in the network about anything, what would it be?
Work with good people that you like, and try to find that, because to me that's more important than any set of tools that you have, any software you have. The more that, once you realize that no matter how good you are, you're only going to be as good as yourself, and realize that, especially with filmmaking, it's the team aspect of it is what really makes stuff great. I think the better off you'll be. So find a good team, or find someone that you're like-minded with that wants to, you know, be going towards the same goal as you, and you'll only be better served for it.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Adam. I'm going to stop the broadcast now, and if any of you guys have any super amazing burning questions for Adam, you can email me at jennifer@frederator.com, and I will forward them, and then he can decide if he wants to answer them or not. So thanks again, everybody, and I will see you at the next Hangout.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Bye-bye.